Did you know that there is a place in America where the only car ever to break the sound barrier did it on the floor of a dried-up lake? Where the United States detonated 928 nuclear bombs in one county, averaging one every 16 days for 41 years. And where, if you look at any mountain, you can see a perfectly flat line carved into the rock halfway up, a waterline from a sea that vanished while human beings were alive to watch. It's called the Great Basin. It is not just empty desert. It is the largest unknown landscape in America, the floor of two vanished inland seas, and the part of the West that doesn't make sense until you've seen it. Today, 35 wild facts about the Great Basin that sound completely fake, but every single one is real. 35. The desert bigger than France. The largest desert in the United States is bigger than the state of California, roughly the size of France, and home to almost nobody. Most Americans cannot name it or find it on a map. You probably know the Mojave, the Sonoran, maybe even the Chihuahuan, but none of those is the largest. It's called the Great Basin. It covers approximately 200,000 square miles across Nevada, western Utah, eastern California, southeastern Oregon, and southern Idaho. A country of 67 million people, France, would fit inside it, and almost nobody lives there. And the strangest thing about it isn't its size. It's that no river inside this entire region ever reaches the sea. Every drop of rain that falls here either evaporates, sinks into the ground, or pools into a salt lake that dies of thirst. 34. The invisible gold under Nevada. Nevada is called the Silver State. Every license plate, every road sign, every state document tells you so, but the silver largely ran out a century ago. The mineral that actually defines Nevada today is gold, and Nevada produces 76% of all gold mined in the United States, making it the fourth largest gold-producing jurisdiction on Earth, behind only China, Australia, and Russia. The harder part isn't the quantity, it's that you can't see it. The deposits along the Carlin Trend in northern Nevada are what geologists call submicroscopic gold, particles dissolved at the atomic level inside arsenic-rich pyrite crystals. You could hold a ton of Carlin ore in your hands and not see a single grain. Nobody knew it existed at scale until 1961, when a Newmont mining geologist named John Livermore went looking with chemical assays instead of his eyes. 33. Nevada's rainbow geyser was built by accident. You might think a geyser is the kind of thing nature takes millions of years to build. Yellowstone's geysers have been doing what they do for 100,000 years. But 2 hours north of Reno, in the middle of the Black Rock Desert, sits a 6-foot-tall geothermal geyser covered in red, green, and orange thermophilic algae. It's called Fly Geyser. It shoots boiling water 5 feet into the air, and it looks like a Pixar movie. And it exists because in 1964, a geothermal energy company drilled a test well, failed to find what they wanted, and walked away without properly sealing the hole. Pressurized hot water has been escaping ever since, for 60 years, depositing calcium carbonate and growing the cone by several inches every year. Since 2016, the geyser has been owned by the Burning Man Project, which runs limited guided tours from April to October. 32. Mark Twain became Mark Twain in the Nevada desert. Most people associate Mark Twain with the Mississippi River, the riverboats, the steamships, the Deep South. But Samuel Clemens didn't actually become Mark Twain anywhere near a river. He became Mark Twain in a Nevada mining town at 6,200 feet elevation. He arrived in Virginia City in the autumn of 1862 as a reporter for the Territorial Enterprise, initially signing his pieces, Josh. On February 3, 1863, he signed a dispatch with the pen name Mark Twain for the first time. The name was a Mississippi leadsman's term for 2 fathoms of safe water, and Clemens picked it up in a high desert newspaper office, more than 800 miles from any navigable river. By the time he left Virginia City, the population had reached 20,000. The mine shafts dropped 3,000 feet straight down, and underground temperatures reached 150 degrees. 31. A Nevada silver mine funded the Union Army. The Civil War is usually remembered as a conflict bankrolled by Eastern industry and Midwestern farming. The contribution of the American West rarely gets a mention, but in June 1859, 2 prospectors named Hosea and Evan Grosh discovered an enormous silver deposit under a mountain in western Nevada. It became the Comstock Lode, named for a man who didn't actually discover it, after the Grosch brothers both died before they could profit. Peak production in 1877 yielded the equivalent of roughly $820 million in today's gold and silver. Lincoln pushed Nevada to statehood on October 31, 1864, just days before the presidential election, specifically because he needed its silver and its electoral votes to win the war. A territory that didn't exist as a state in 1858 became, in 5 years, one of the financial engines of the Union. 30. The Great Basin has 400 mountain ranges. When people imagine the Great Basin, if they imagine anything at all, they picture a flat, featureless wasteland, maybe a few sand dunes. The reality is the exact opposite. The Great Basin contains somewhere between 160 and 400 parallel mountain ranges, depending on how you count them. If you drive Interstate 80 across northern Nevada, you cross 8 mountain ranges in 600 miles. That's the same as driving across the entire state of Texas and crossing a different range every 75 miles. Geologists call it the Basin and Range Province. It is the only place on Earth where a piece of continental crust this large is actively being pulled apart, stretched east-west until the surface cracks into parallel valleys and mountains. Some of those mountains rise more than 10,000 feet above the basin floor. Every one of them, at the end of the last ice age, was an island. 29. The rocks that walk by themselves. In a place called Racetrack Playa, on the southwestern edge of the Great Basin inside Death Valley National Park, there are rocks weighing up to 700 pounds that move across the perfectly flat lakebed on their own, leaving curving trails up to 200 meters long in a single winter. For 80 years, nobody knew how. Theories included dust devils, magnetic fields, and bacterial slime. Then, in December 2013, 2 scientists named Richard and James Norris set up time-lapse cameras and finally caught it happening. The mechanism turned out to be unspectacular. In rare winters when the playa floods and freezes, a thin sheet of ice, only 3 millimeters thick, breaks up in the morning sun. A 9-mile-per-hour wind pushes those floating ice panels into the rocks, and the rocks scrape across the wet mud at up to 15 feet per minute. For 80 years, people invented theories. The actual mechanism was a sheet of ice and a soft wind. 28. 40 sea monsters died in the Nevada desert. In the Shoshone Mountains of central Nevada, at 7,000 feet elevation, you can walk into a barn at Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park and see roughly 40 fossilized sea monsters lying exactly where they died. They are Shonisaurus popularis, Triassic-era marine reptiles up to 50 feet long, about the length of a school bus, and one of the largest marine reptiles to ever exist. They have been there for 225 million years. In the Triassic, when these animals were alive, the entire state of Nevada sat at the western edge of the supercontinent Pangaea and was the floor of an open tropical ocean. The mountains around the fossils didn't yet exist. Recent research suggests they came here to give birth, a 225-million-year-old marine maternity ward. 27. Nevada has a glacier. Nevada is dry. Nevada is hot. Most of the state averages less than 10 inches of rain per year, and summer temperatures regularly exceed 110 degrees. So this fact is impossible until you understand the topography. Inside Great Basin National Park, near the Nevada-Utah border, there is an actual permanent body of ice high on the north face of Wheeler Peak, a 13,063-foot summit rising more than 8,000 feet above the surrounding desert. Technically, it's a rock glacier, a mixture of ice and rock, and it's been clinging to that mountain for around 10,000 years. It's roughly the size of a city block, and scientists have been measuring its retreat every summer since 2005. It's still there, for now. 26. The Pony Express lasted 18 months. The Pony Express is the most mythologized institution in American Western history. Hollywood made dozens of films about it. Every American schoolchild learns about it. And the Pony Express operated for exactly 18 months. It launched in April 1860 and ended on October 26, 1861, the day the transcontinental telegraph was completed and made it instantly obsolete. Of its 197 stations across 1,966 miles, 47 were in Nevada, more than in any other state or territory. Riders crossed 417 miles of the Great Basin's most punishing desert in sub-10-day relays. The most famous Pony Express ride in history was made by Robert "Pony Bob" Haslam in May 1860 during the Pyramid Lake War, when he rode 380 miles round trip in under 36 hours, through burned-out stations and past a murdered station keeper to deliver his mail run. He was 19. The following March, he carried Lincoln's inaugural address 180 miles across Nevada in a record 8 hours. If you have a favorite so far, the comments on these videos tend to be more interesting than the videos themselves, at least to me. And someone watching this is going to know the Great Basin better than I do. If you're watching to the end, the subscribe button is right there too. Back to it. 25. Steens Mountain, a mile-high cliff. In the southeastern corner of Oregon, at the very northern edge of the hydrographic Great Basin, sits Steens Mountain. It is not a range. It is a single fault block of basalt 40 miles long, summiting at 9,733 feet, that on its east face drops 5,500 vertical feet to the floor of the Alvord Desert. That's the same as stacking the Empire State Building 3 times on top of itself, and then dropping it. Most Americans have never heard of Steens Mountain. It is the largest fault block mountain in North America, and in this case, the basalt is a slab, tilted gently westward across 25 miles, and broken cleanly on its east side. At the base of that cliff, hot springs bubble up out of the fault at 170 degrees Fahrenheit, and cool down enough in concrete pools for people to soak in them. The mountain rose. The desert below it sank. That desert, the Alvord, was itself the floor of an Ice Age lake at the end of the last glacial period. 24. A river that dies in the sand. Most major American rivers eventually reach the sea. The Mississippi flows into the Gulf. The Columbia flows into the Pacific. The Colorado used to reach the Sea of Cortez. The Humboldt River does not. The Humboldt rises in northeastern Nevada and flows roughly 300 miles southwest across the entire state. For 19th century immigrants heading west across the Great Basin, the Humboldt was the difference between life and death, the only consistent water source between Salt Lake and the Sierra Nevada. Mark Twain visited it in 1861 and joked it was small enough to step over and drink dry. But the river doesn't end anywhere recognizable. It runs into the Humboldt Sink and disappears into the desert, evaporating into the air or sinking into the ground. There is no outlet. It is the longest river in Nevada, and the only river of that size in the United States that never reaches the sea. The Humboldt Sink, where it dies, sits on the dry floor of an Ice Age lake. 23. Half of America's wild horses live in the Nevada desert. The Mustang is the most romantic symbol of the American West. Movies, paintings, postage stamps. Most Americans assume those wild horses live in Montana, or Wyoming, or maybe the open ranges of the Dakotas. They don't. Roughly half of all wild Mustangs in the United States, somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 horses, live in Nevada and the broader Great Basin. They are there because of one Nevada woman named Velma Braun Johnston. In 1950, while driving to work in Reno, Velma noticed blood dripping from a truck in front of her. She followed it. It led to a slaughterhouse where wild horses were being rendered into pet food and fertilizer. For the next 21 years, Velma, who would be mockingly called Wild Horse Annie by a Nevada state legislator and who took the name as her own, campaigned for federal protection of wild horses. She mobilized school children across America to write to Congress. And on December 18, 1971, the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act passed both chambers of Congress with 0 dissenting votes. 22. Los Angeles drank a 700,000-year-old lake down by 45 feet. In the eastern Sierra Nevada, at the western edge of the Great Basin, sits Mono Lake, one of the oldest lakes in North America, more than 700,000 years old, with surreal limestone spires called tufa towers rising out of its salty waters. Those towers formed underwater over thousands of years, at the mouths of freshwater springs on the lake bottom. The reason they are visible above the surface today is criminal, at least morally. In 1941, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power began diverting Mono Lake's tributary streams through a 350-mile aqueduct. For 53 years, the city drained a 700,000-year-old desert lake into its kitchen sinks. The lake dropped 45 vertical feet. Its surface area shrank by nearly a third. Its salinity doubled. The tufa towers were exposed to the air. They exist above the surface only because Los Angeles emptied a desert lake, one of the last living remnants of Ice Age Lake Lahontan, into its kitchen sinks. 21. The U.S. government sued two Shoshone sisters for grazing cattle on their own land. On October 1, 1863, the Western Shoshone Nation signed the Treaty of Ruby Valley with the United States government. Under that treaty, the Shoshone did not cede a single acre of land. They agreed only to allow safe passage. But by the 20th century, the federal government claimed ownership of approximately 24 million acres of former Western Shoshone territory, an area larger than the state of Indiana, most of it in Nevada, including the land that became the Nevada test site. In 1974, the Bureau of Land Management sued two sisters named Mary and Carrie Dan, ranchers from Crescent Valley, Nevada, for grazing cattle on land they considered their own. In 1985, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against them. In 2002, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights ruled in their favor. Congress offered $145 million to make the claim go away. The tribe refused, because accepting would extinguish the claim. Mary Dan died in 2005. Carrie Dan continued the fight until her own death in 2021. The land is still disputed. 20. 40 caves under the Nevada desert. Most Americans associate caves with Kentucky or West Virginia. The American West is supposed to be exposed rock, dry canyons, big sky. But beneath Great Basin National Park alone, there are at least 40 known caves, including Lehman Caves, Nevada's longest, with more than 300 of the rare formations geologists call shields. Most caves in the world have only one or two. The cave formed in limestone deposited 550 million years ago, which means the rock these passages are carved into was already 300 million years old when the first dinosaurs appeared. According to the most widely told version, a rancher named Absalom Lehman felt cold air blowing out of the ground and went looking for the source. Inside, scientists later found a small arachnid with red claws that lives nowhere else on Earth, the Great Basin cave pseudoscorpion. 19. The hottest day on Earth might be wrong. On July 10, 1913, a weather observer at Greenland Ranch in Death Valley recorded a temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. For 113 years, that has been the official record for the highest air temperature ever reliably measured on the surface of planet Earth. But in November 2025, a paper published in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society argued that the 134-degree reading was probably wrong, somewhere between 12 and 16 degrees too hot. The argument is technical. The Greenland Ranch thermometer was in a non-standard instrument shelter, exposed to direct sunlight reflection off the surrounding salt and rock. Recalculated using modern lapse rate models against 102 years of nearby station data, the actual temperature that day was probably closer to 120 degrees. The World Meteorological Organization is reviewing it. The official record stands. But the hottest day in Earth's history might turn out to be the result of a broken thermometer. The 5 consecutive days at 129 degrees or above in that 1913 heat wave are documented. Just the peak number is in doubt. 18. The Nevada desert preserved a man for 10,600 years. In August 1940, two archaeologists named Sidney and Georgia Wheeler entered a small cave 13 miles east of Fallon, Nevada. Inside, they found a human body, naturally mummified, wrapped in a rabbit skin blanket and reed mats, wearing moccasins. They estimated his age at about 2,000 years. Half a century later, when carbon dating became accurate enough to test the remains directly, the result came back as 10,600 years before the present. This man, who would later become known as the Spirit Cave Mummy, died in this Nevada cave roughly 5,600 years before the oldest Egyptian mummy with a known identity. The Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe claimed him as an ancestor. The U.S. government held the remains in federal custody for 76 years. He was finally returned to the tribe in 2016 and buried in 2018. They call him the storyteller. He died around 1,600 years after Ice Age Lake Lahontan's waters had finally receded from his valley. 17. 80,000 people gather every year on the floor of an Ice Age lake. In the Black Rock Desert of northwestern Nevada, in late August every year, somewhere around 80,000 people build a temporary city in the middle of nowhere, stay for 9 days, and then disappear without a trace. It's called Burning Man. For 1 week each year, Black Rock City is the third largest population center in Nevada, bigger than Reno, and the ground beneath them is not ordinary ground. The Black Rock Desert Playa is the dried floor of Ice Age Lake Lahontan, and the silt deposited by that lake is more than 10,000 feet deep at its thickest point. That is nearly 2 miles of accumulated lake bottom sediment under every footprint, every art car, every wooden effigy. Lake Lahontan disappeared roughly 12,700 years ago. Burning Man literally happens on the bottom of a vanished sea. 16. The art installation that drowned, then came back. Most public art is static. You install it once, and it stays. The most famous land art installation in America did not. In April 1970, an American artist named Robert Smithson hired contractors to haul 6,000 tons of black basalt rock, roughly the weight of 1,000 adult African elephants, into a remote inlet of the Great Salt Lake. He had them arrange the rocks into a 1,500-foot counterclockwise spiral that uncoiled into the lake from a place called Roselle Point. The artwork was called Spiral Jetty. 2 years later, in 1972, the lake's water level rose and Spiral Jetty disappeared underwater. It sat underwater for 30 years. Smithson, who died in 1973, never saw his work reemerge. By 2002, humans had drunk so much water out of the Great Salt Lake, through diversions, agriculture, and growth, that the lake dropped to a level low enough to expose Smithson's work again. Spiral Jetty has been visible ever since. The art installation is now a measuring stick for how fast we are emptying out the last remnant of Lake Bonneville. 15. The 41-pound trout that came back from extinction. Pyramid Lake in northwestern Nevada is one of the strangest bodies of water in North America. It is a closed basin desert lake with no outlet, and it was once home to the largest freshwater trout in North America. The Lahontan cutthroat trout regularly grew to 30 and 40 pounds, with documented specimens exceeding 60. In 1925, a fisherman named John Skimmerhorn caught a 41-pound Lahontan cutthroat at Pyramid Lake, the world record for any cutthroat trout of any species anywhere. Within 20 years, the entire population was extinct. Derby Dam, built across the Truckee River in 1905, had cut off the spawning migration. In 1977, a small population was found in a single remote stream in Utah. A USGS biologist named Lisa Heckey spent decades reintroducing them. In 2014, wild Lahontan cutthroats spawned in the Truckee River for the first time since World War II. 14. A shrinking Utah lake feeds the global seafood industry. The Great Salt Lake is so salty, between 3.5 and 8 times saltier than the ocean, that it floats you like a cork and kills nearly every form of life that tries to live in it, with one exception: tiny crustaceans called brine shrimp. They thrive in the Great Salt Lake because nothing else can eat them, and as a direct result, it is the world's single largest source of brine shrimp eggs, accounting for roughly 45% of the global commercial supply. Those eggs are shipped to shrimp farms and fish hatcheries in Ecuador, Israel, Vietnam, and Indonesia, where they're used to feed the larvae of approximately 20 billion pounds of farmed seafood per year. Roughly 60 pounds of fish and shrimp per American every year depends on a desert lake in Utah, a lake that's the shrunken remnant of Ice Age Lake Bonneville. So salty, it has no fish predators of its own, and humans have drunk almost half of that lake away in our lifetimes. 13. The rarest vertebrate on Earth lives in a single Nevada pool. In a place called Amargosa Valley in southern Nevada, there is a flooded limestone cavern, a single pool of warm water, surface area roughly 538 square feet, about the size of a 2-car garage. Inside that pool lives a 1.5-inch fish called the Devil's Hole pupfish. It is the only place on Earth where this species has ever existed. In spring 2013, the total wild population was counted at 35 fish, and that was the entire species anywhere. On a single night in April 2016, 3 men named Sargent, Schwinkendorf and Reyes drove around a locked security gate, fired a shotgun at the cameras, drank beer, and one of them stripped to his boxer shorts and swam in the pool. One pupfish was found dead the next morning. 3 drunk men with a shotgun nearly wiped out an entire vertebrate species in a single night. The pupfish exist because Devil's Hole sits over an aquifer connected to the ancient Lake Lahontan water system, the last living remnant of an Ice Age sea. 12. The oldest tree on Earth lives in the California desert. Most Americans think the oldest trees are the coastal redwoods, or maybe the giant sequoias. They are wrong. The actual oldest living non-clonal tree on the planet is a Great Basin bristlecone pine called Methuselah, which lives at 10,000 feet elevation in the White Mountains of Eastern California, inside the hydrographic Great Basin. As of 2026, Methuselah is approximately 4,857 years old. It germinated around 2833 BC. It was 1,000 years old when the Egyptian pyramids were built. It was discovered and dated in 1957 by dendrochronologist Edmund Schulman. The U.S. Forest Service keeps its exact location secret to prevent vandalism. In 2013, scientists confirmed an even older bristlecone, 5,065 years old, also in the same grove. Its location is also classified. 11. 70 farmers seized an aqueduct in 1924. In 1913, the Los Angeles Aqueduct opened. It is a 233-mile gravity-fed channel that drains the Owens Valley, a Great Basin terminal basin, and sends its water to Los Angeles. Within a generation, Owens Lake, once a significant Great Basin terminal lake, was gone. The valley's economy was destroyed. The farms died. And on November 16, 1924, 70 unarmed men from the Owens Valley took matters into their own hands. They drove to the Alabama Gates Aqueduct Spillway, north of Lone Pine, opened the gates, and sent the water back down the dry Owens River for the first time in 11 years. They held the gates for 4 days. 700 supporters joined them. They served barbecue. They invited a film crew. It was less a riot than a community picnic. Then Los Angeles came back and took the water again. Owens Lake is now the largest single source of particulate air pollution in the United States. The aqueduct is still flowing. If the first 25 facts have been geography, biology, and human drama, the last 10 turn towards something else. The Great Basin is also where the U.S. government detonated bombs, hid spy planes, and trained crews for the most consequential missions in history. If you've spotted something we missed, drop it in the comments. Let's count down to number 1. 10. The darkest sky in the contiguous United States. Halfway between Las Vegas and Salt Lake City in eastern Nevada, there is a place where the only light at night comes from stars. Great Basin National Park is certified as a Gold-tier International Dark Sky Park, the highest possible classification. Bortle Class 2 on most clear nights. At that level of darkness, you can see a phenomenon called Gegenschein, a faint oval glow directly opposite the sun in the night sky, caused by sunlight backscattering off interplanetary dust between Earth and Mars. Most Americans have never heard of Gegenschein because it is invisible from cities and suburbs and even from most rural areas. You can only see it from the very darkest places on Earth. Great Basin National Park is one of them. The sky is that dark because there is nothing for 200 miles in any direction except empty Great Basin desert. 9. The Great Salt Lake is saltier than the ocean, and it's dying. The Great Salt Lake in northern Utah is between 3.5 and 8 times saltier than the ocean. Its north arm, separated by a railroad causeway, is sometimes 10 times saltier. So saline it turns bubblegum pink from halophilic microbes. Salinity is what makes the lake biologically and visually extraordinary, and salinity is what is killing it. Since 1847, when Mormon settlers first arrived in the valley, the lake has lost nearly half its total volume. In the summer of 2022, it reached the lowest level ever recorded. The exposed lakebed contains arsenic and other toxic metals, which are now blowing in dust storms across northern Utah. The lake is the last shrinking remnant of Ice Age Lake Bonneville. It survived 14,000 years of climate change after the Ice Age ended. It may not survive us. Right now, the salt flat and saline lake landscape that made Utah, Utah is disappearing in our lifetimes. 8. Bodie. 10,000 people, now 0. Bodie, California is named for a prospector, William S. Bodie, who discovered gold there in July 1859. By 1879, the town high in the eastern Sierra Nevada had reached a peak population of around 10,000 people, with 65 saloons, 2,000 buildings, 30 active gold mines, and a main street running for over a mile. By 1942, the last mine had closed. Today, the population of Bodie is 0, but more than 170 of the original wooden buildings still stand, preserved by the California State Parks policy of arrested decay, which means nothing is restored and nothing is removed. The buildings are stabilized exactly as they were found when the last residents walked away. The dishes are still on the shelves. The clothes are still in the closets. The ledger books are still on the desks. It is the most intact ghost town in the American West, and it sits in the Mono Basin, part of the Lake Lahontan watershed. 7. The world's largest lithium deposit sits on a massacre site. In Humboldt County, Nevada, just south of the Oregon border, sits the largest confirmed lithium deposit in North America, and possibly the world. It is called Thacker Pass. Recent estimates suggest it is 10 to 12 times larger than what was previously considered the world's biggest lithium site. It is the deposit that may determine whether the United States can build its own electric vehicle battery supply chain. But Thacker Pass has another name. The Northern Paiute and Western Shoshone call it Pihi-Muha, Rotten Moon. On September 12, 1865, U.S. Army soldiers massacred dozens of Paiute men, women, and children camped at Pihi-Muha while the hunters were away. 22 tribes consider the site sacred. A known survivor of that 1865 massacre was named Ox Sam. His name is now on a Paiute protest camp that has stood at Thacker Pass since 2023. In 2021, 3 tribes filed federal lawsuits to stop the mine. Federal courts denied motions to halt the project. Construction began in 2025. The largest lithium mine in America is being built on top of a 160-year-old grave. 6. The crew that dropped the atomic bombs trained on a salt flat. Most Americans associate the atomic bomb with Los Alamos, New Mexico, the secret facility where the bombs were designed. They are right about the design, but the crews who actually flew the bombs trained somewhere else. The 509th Composite Group, led by Colonel Paul Tibbets, dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they did their entire flight training in a remote Utah desert town. They trained at Wendover Army Airfield, a base on the Utah-Nevada border that was established in 1940. Wendover sits at the eastern edge of the Bonneville Salt Flats. At wartime peak, this remote desert outpost housed 17,500 soldiers and was the most secret installation in the United States Army. In a town that had a few hundred residents, the 509th practiced for months by dropping dummy pumpkin bombs, shaped identically to the Fat Man plutonium bomb, across the White Salt Flats. Security was so absolute that most members of the 509th never knew the actual purpose of their training. The hangar that housed the Enola Gay still stands on those flats today. 5. The most secret military base in America sits on a dry lakebed. Area 51 is one of the most culturally charged words in American English. Aliens, conspiracies, leaked Pentagon documents, internet jokes. But the actual installation, 83 miles northwest of Las Vegas in Lincoln County, Nevada, has a much more boring name. It is the Groom Lake facility. And Groom Lake itself is a dry salt flat, a playa. The runways and the hangars at Area 51 are built on the floor of a vanished Ice Age lake. The CIA didn't even publicly acknowledge the existence of the Groom Lake facility until 2013, almost 60 years after the base was founded in 1955. The U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the F-117 stealth fighter were all developed there. Area 51 is one small piece of the much larger Nevada Test and Training Range. 3.1 million acres of restricted land, larger than the state of Connecticut, with 12,000 square miles of restricted airspace above it. America's most secret military base sits on the floor of an Ice Age lake. 4. The Donner Party. The disaster started on a salt flat, not a mountain. Almost every American who has heard of the Donner Party associates it with the Sierra Nevada. snowbound emigrants in a high mountain pass, the cannibalism, the winter of 1846 and 1847. What most people don't know is that the disaster did not begin in the mountains. It began on a Utah salt flat, weeks earlier. On August 30th, 1846, the 87-person Donner, following advice from a man named Lansford Hastings, set out to cross the Great Salt Lake Desert. Hastings had told them it was 40 miles, 2 days. The actual crossing was 70 miles and took 6 days. They lost 4 wagons. Most of their draft animals died. By the time they emerged on the western side and reached the Humboldt River, they were 3 weeks behind the last safe crossing window in the Sierra Nevada. They were already doomed. 42 of them, nearly half the party, would die before reaching California. The salt flat they crossed was the floor of ancient Lake Bonneville. Wagon ruts from their disaster were still visible on the salt as recently as 1986. 3. The only car ever to break the sound barrier did it on the floor of a dried-up lake. On October 15, 1997, on the Black Rock Desert Playa in northwestern Nevada, a British jet car called Thrust SSC, driven by Royal Air Force Wing Commander Andy Green and powered by twin Rolls-Royce Spey turbofan engines, accelerated to 763.035 miles per hour over a measured mile. It became the first and only land vehicle in history to officially break the sound barrier. The shockwave was audible to spectators on the playa as a double sonic boom, the same sound a fighter jet makes when it goes supersonic. The reason the run could happen at all is the floor of Ice Age Lake Lahontan. The Black Rock Desert is the flattest large surface in North America. Less than a meter of elevation variation across 310 square kilometers. That kind of flatness is impossible by natural erosion in any short time frame. It exists because a body of water as large as Lake Erie sat on top of this ground for tens of thousands of years and laid down a perfectly level deposit of silt. Thrust SSC's record has stood unbroken for 29 years. 2. The United States detonated 928 nuclear weapons in one Nevada county. On January 27, 1951, the United States government conducted its first nuclear weapons test at a site 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas in Nye County, Nevada. By the time the last test was conducted on September 23, 1992, the government had detonated 928 nuclear devices at the same site, by some measures making it the most bombed piece of land in the history of planet Earth. 928 tests over 41 years. That averages out to 1 nuclear explosion every 16 days. The Nevada test site is 1,360 square miles, larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. The first 100 tests were conducted above ground and were visible from the Las Vegas Strip, leading to a brief but real tourist economy of atomic cocktails and rooftop mushroom cloud watching parties in the 1950s. In 1997, the National Cancer Institute estimated the fallout from those tests caused somewhere between 10,000 and 75,000 additional thyroid cancer cases in what came to be called downwinder communities across Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. President Truman chose this site in 1950 because of the Great Basin's defining feature, its emptiness and its federal land taken from the Western Shoshone without their consent. 1. The entire Great Basin is the floor of 2 vanished inland seas. We end where it all began, because every salt flat, every dry playa, every dead lake, every ghost town and ancient cave and salt-encrusted highway you've seen in this video, all of it, is sitting on the floor of 2 enormous Ice Age inland seas. In the eastern half of the Great Basin, there was Lake Bonneville. At its peak, around 14,500 years ago, Lake Bonneville covered approximately 20,000 square miles of western Utah, eastern Nevada, and southern Idaho. It was 1,000 feet deep at its deepest point. It was, in size and depth, comparable to modern Lake Michigan. In the western half, there was Lake Lahontan. At its peak, around 12,700 years ago, Lake Lahontan covered 8,500 square miles of northwestern Nevada, northeastern California, and southern Oregon. It was 900 feet deep at present-day Pyramid Lake. It was larger than today's Lake Erie. Combined, these two vanished seas covered more water than every Great Lake except Superior. They were both ending at the same time human beings were already here. The ancestors of today's Western Shoshone and Paiute peoples stood on their shores. Lake Bonneville ended catastrophically. Around 14,500 years ago, it overtopped its rim at Red Rock Pass in southern Idaho and released 4,700 cubic kilometers of water in what geologists call the Bonneville Flood, the second largest flood in Earth's history. The water level dropped 351 feet in weeks. Lake Lahontan didn't break. It simply evaporated, slowly, over thousands of years, breaking apart into the smaller lakes, Pyramid, Walker, Mono, that survive today as fossils of itself. In 1890, a USGS geologist named Grove Carl Gilbert published a 438-page monograph proving all of this. He used the shoreline terraces visible on the mountains above Salt Lake City, the flat lines halfway up the rock, to reconstruct the entire history of Lake Bonneville, and he proved it in 1890. The man who actually named the Great Basin, John C. Fremont, in 1844, never knew what it was. The water lines are still there. You can see them today from Interstate 80. They are the only proof you need that this place was, a geological heartbeat ago, the largest inland sea system west of the Mississippi. After these 35 facts about the Great Basin, which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments and let us know. If you think we missed something, we'd love to hear from you. There's another video on screen right now, so you can keep exploring the geography of America.